So we are going to be taking a closer look at Razor code. It is used in our views, and you can have expressions, which are just basically one-liners, and you can have blocks, which basically have an opening and closing curly brace. All Razor code begins with an @ sign. Okay? And Visual Studio kind of highlights that for you by placing it in yellow, so it kind of stands out. So it's pretty easy to look through your views and determine where the Razor code is located. So we are going to be learning a little bit more about Razor today and Razor syntax. If you need to create variables, you can use the keyword var. You can also just include the data type. Either way works. The data types that you can use are the same data types as C#. If you're going to do a string, it does have to be in double quotes. The code is case sensitive. And the operators that you'll use when you do any kind of conditional check are basically the same as what you would use in C# and other languages for that matter. And so I do have some examples. You can see here I'm creating some variables using the keyword var, and then I'm also using data types. This is all located in a block. If I wanted a single statement block, I could create that as well. And so anytime you have curly braces, it is considered a block. A code expression does not have curly braces. It just has an @ sign followed by the code. And this is typically what you embed inside your HTML. And remember, the Razor View engine actually interprets all of that and converts it into static HTML before it sends it to the browser. So here's another example of a block. And this particular block is creating a little greeting message, which is then displayed in an expression. Now, Razor is designed to work with objects. So you can use built-in objects like data objects, or you can use objects that you define and create. You can also use a database records or rows. And I have a little example of using Razor with a date and time object. So first we're grabbing the current date, and then we're displaying the hour, the minute, and the second. You can use loops in Razor. Loops are often used for arrays or lists and collections. And so here is a little example that you guys should be familiar with because it's from our detective agency app. And so here is a list of staff members. We grab the length. We have a little variable that we initialize to 0. And then we use loops to process. And so here we have our heading. And then below that, we have the loop. And so the @ sign has to go before the keyword for. And then you have an opening and a closing curly brace. These do not require @ signs. They are considered part of the for loop. Then you'll notice that the code line is a separate paragraph, and we have Razor, the @ sign, in front of the array that we are accessing. Okay, so this is an expression that we've embedded into the HTML. So for loops work the same here, other than the fact that you have to put an @ sign in front of them. So you'll notice that we do have a subscript X that we are increasing. Eventually, the test of X less than length will be false and we'll be done with the loop. A little more efficient way is using for each because that's automatically going to process every single item, whether you're dealing with an array or a collection or a list, it will automatically process everything. So it's a little more efficient. And so we've got at for each, we've declared a variable called person that we are going to be accessing. And here we have indicated that we're going to access every single item or person in the staff array. And so it automatically is going to iterate through every single occurrence. And to access the data, we just put the @ sign in front of person. And then here's basically that same example. Um, and this one is using a while loop. So we're going to basically kind of display the staff members as long as they aren't Wilma. So I don't know why we're hating on Wilma, but that's what we're doing in that particular loop. So in addition to doing those kind of loops, you can do something called an inline loop. These are used to generate the options in a select. So this is for a form. And so this little example will generate months or numbers that represent months. So you can see that for the label we have month. We have got a little name for our select tag and an ID. And then we get into this little for loop. So this is all Razor code here. And then for the option, you can see that the value that we are displaying is the month, the numeric month. We can also use loops to generate links in kind of the same manner. Here, we've got a for each loop. We've sent it a view bag called with the properties of categories, and we're going to process every single item that is in that view bag, and we're going to be creating links. So you can see we've got the href here with a route, and then we've got our category that we will be displaying. Okay, so category here serves as like ID. Okay, so controller, action method, ID. So lots of different ways to use loops. And if we take a look at the guitar shop, any kind of index or list is more than likely going to have a loop in it. Okay, and that is just because the whole concept of a list means more than one. So here we have a for each loop going through different categories. And let's see, I doubt either one of those has a list or loop. Let us look over at our spa Razor page. So if we look in contact, the index is where you would look to see any type of loop. So this is displayed in a table. So the heading row obviously is not going to have loops, but the detail lines will. So you can see a for each. And that's just a very efficient way of processing. So you see it here in this index, and you will also see it in the index down here under service. In addition to doing loops, you can also do conditionals. And so conditionals are if else, nested if else, and switch. And I know you guys are super familiar with this already. So the only thing that you would really need to keep in mind is that you need to put the @ sign in front of your if, okay? And then you use if, and in parentheses is the condition you're checking, which is all pretty normal. You have an opening and a closing curly brace. And then that's all considered part of the if. Now, what is a little more unusual in our views is that we're typically using ifs to either add to maybe a class or to add something to a link. So they're often embedded inside a tag. And that's what this one is. So you can see that this is an anchor, which is a link. And so we've specified the controller using a tag helper. We've got the action method using a tag helper. We've even got the route ID. So if you remember, the convention is controller, action method, ID, which is optional. It's an optional parameter. In this case, we are specifying all. And then we have a class. So the first thing in the class is list group item. You'll notice there is no closing quote because the next thing that's in the class is coming from the if statement. And so we're checking the selected category name to see if it's all. Because if it is all, and you'll notice our route is all, then they would like active placed in this class list. If it's not all, it doesn't do anything, right? So in this case, it is all, so it's going to actually add the word active to the class. And you'll notice here's our closing brace. Here is the closing double quote for class. And then we've got our angle bracket. What displays as the link is the word all, and then we have the closing anchor. So how this looks after the Razor renders this is like this. This is what gets sent to the browser. Now, if for some reason this condition tested false, this is what would be sent to the browser. In addition to doing a single-sided if, you can do an if-else, which is considered a double-sided if. So it does one thing if it's true and one thing if it is false. And so this little example would, if you think about our music store app, none of the album artwork existed. So what this would do in the index view is it would check to see if the album art URL was not equal to a blank. So if it wasn't equal to a blank, which means there is artwork, it's going to display it. However, if it is blank, and all of ours were, then it actually displays a generic image instead. Okay, so instead of having the album artwork column, very boring, with nothing in it, we get a generic image instead. So just for fun, I'm going to show you what this looks like when you run the app. So if there was album artwork, it would actually show that instead of the generic, but that looks a lot better than the way it used to look with nothing displayed. Okay, and all it was a simple little if else that was actually added to the view. So let me show you how it looks in the view itself. So before, this was the only line that was there. So we added just the little if else here, and we created that generic image. Now a nested if else, we have used these already in the controller. You can also use it in the view. So this is a little example of an if else used with products. And then up here, this is one that we took a look at, well, I believe it was last week, to determine how to sort the artist information before we passed it to the view. So this is in a controller, and this is actually in a view. You can also use a switch, and you can use the switch in the controller, which is probably where you're going to have it. Or you could put it in a view if it makes sense to put it in a view, but quite often it deals with more business logic, and in that case, it would go into the controller. Now, this little example I have here is a switch that you could easily put in a view because basically you are switching on the day of the week and putting out a little generic message. Okay, so this is not really business logic. It's just a nicety that you have in your view. Inline conditionals, we already kind of looked at one of those. Basically, anytime inside a tag you are executing an if, you have an inline conditional. Because if it's true, you're going to be adding attributes or classes or what have you to the tag. There is a more efficient way of doing this. Uh, this this first example is a single-sided if. And if you only want to do something when it's true, that would be appropriate to use. However, if you want to do one thing if it's true, maybe something else if it's false, instead of using an if else inside a tag, you can use what the ternary operator, which is the question mark. And so this is available in most languages. And how it works is before the question mark, you have a condition you're checking. The first thing that's after the question mark is what you want to do if it's true. Then you have a colon and what you want to do if it's false. So this is kind of the same thing as the previous example. It's just written in this shortened format. So you'll notice that we still have the class that we are trying to set. So we have the opening double quote, list group item. Then we have this inline conditional that is checking our category name to see if it's equal to all. If that is true, it puts active, the text active, into the tag. And if it's false, it just is putting nothing into the tag. And here is where the ending double quote is located for the class. Then we have our angle bracket, we have our link text, which is all, and we have our closing anchor. Some miscellaneous information on Razor. If you wanted to add comments, or maybe you have a block and you're having some issues and you need to comment out a portion of it, you can create a Razor comment using the @ asterisk, and then whatever it is you want to comment out. And then to end the comment, it is asterisk @ . Razor does allow calculations. These are typically in line, and anything that you want executed, you have to put an @ in front of, and you need to put it in parentheses. And then it will execute numbers or code that you have in between. As far as calling generic methods go, you can have Razor call a method. You have to use an @ HTML dot, and then whatever the name of the method is, and the type. And we are kind of using a format of that with HTML helpers, which we will be learning about more in the future. But you can see that we've got @HTML, display name 4, and we're passing it the lambda expression with our model property. So a few key points that you need to remember about Razor. Razor Engine looks ahead to determine where the code ends. Sometimes it makes mistakes, especially if your HTML has an @ in it, like an email address. It tends to get a tad confused. So if that happens, then you can add parentheses around the Razor code, and the Razor engine will interpret it correctly. Okay, so if we wanted my item at item.length for some reason, and it was thinking this was an email address, you can put it in parentheses and it'll interpret correctly. So we already know we have to use that @ for server-side Razor code. We know about creating blocks. One thing that I don't think I talked about, although there was an example that was showing it, was the fact that if you want to display the text from a code block, you have to use either the @ or use the opening and closing text tag and whatever you want to display in between it. And one of the examples, this one, where we were adding active to the class, utilized text to add it. All of the selections and looping statements have to have the @ in front. And for the model, @model lets you use the model object. Okay, but if you actually want to access the property, you're going to use @model, but the M has to be capitalized. Okay, you'll see that in views. This is kind of a subtle thing. And let me see, I'm not sure if it's in this one. So when you're pulling in the model, you use @model with a lowercase m. But if you're going to access anything from the model directly, and you're not in a for each loop, so a list is probably a bad one to look at. So if you're going to access anything directly, like you do in details, then it's @model, but you'll notice that the M is capitalized here. So it's lowercase when you are referring to the model itself. In this case, we're pulling in product, but when we're accessing the property, we have to use the uppercase M. So that's kind of a Razor in a nutshell.